wherever you're joining us from. So thank you very much for taking your time to enjoy today's webinar. So I'm Catherine Friend. I'm VP of Community for EMEA at Hire. And I'm really focused on building a connected network of senior TA leaders through events, content, and insightful discussions like you've joined today. And before joining Hire, I spent over 11 years in TA, working across agency, in-house, and RPO. For those of you who may not know, Hire is a global in-house TA community with over 12,500 members. And our mission is to elevate the TA profession by creating really meaningful opportunities to connect and network with your peers. And we hold regular events, dinners, breakfasts, alongside producing webinars like this one and white papers to keep you at the forefront of our ever-changing and evolving industry. If you're not yet a member, it's completely free to join, no strings attached. Just head on over to www.hirehq.com to sign up, or you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn after today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to say a huge thank you to Talentful, who is our sponsor for today's webinar and making these conversations possible. Talentful is an embedded RPO that's tailor-made for technology companies and works with the likes of Google, Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, and more. We hire in over 80 different countries and we cover tech, GTM, and J&A hiring. And the model is designed to scale up and down with your requirements, enabling you to add flexibility to your ongoing hiring strategy. So today it's very, very exciting. We are kicking off our brand new webinar series, which is Beyond Borders. And Beyond Borders is really focused about equipping talent leaders with the insights that they need to hire globally, confidently, and competitively. So in each session, we're going to spotlight a different country or region and bringing together both local experts and international TA leaders to help you understand the practical, cultural, and strategic dynamics of expanding into that market. So if you're looking to understand more about the talent market and cultural landscape in Poland, well, congratulations, you're in the right place. This session is for you. And we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A. We'll try and answer them throughout where we can. Otherwise, we'll save time at the end and go through the majority of the questions then. So I will now hand over to my wonderful local experts and speakers to introduce themselves before we dive into the discussion. So Eva, I'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hi, everybody. My name is Eva Ford, and I do work as a manager for talent acquisition. I've spent most of my career working for both big tech companies as well as scale-ups. And a year ago, I made the bold move to relocate from the UK to Poland, where I'm originally from. I think that it's appropriate to say here that, I was inspired by the economic growth of Poland and so many companies setting up their offices here. So here I am, and I'm really happy to be invited to talk about the tech talent in Poland.
Thank you very much. And Barbara?
Hi, folks. My name is Barbara. Delighted to be a part of this adventure, also kicking off this great series. I'm definitely going to watch the next episode, so stay tuned. I'm also waiting to learn more about that. I've been working for over 12 years in a high growth tech companies, building from scratch, scaling, so also going through different stages of maturity of organizations. I'm also born and bred Polish. I moved to Amsterdam a couple of years ago where I currently live, but Poland's not only been one of my core markets, but also a place that I called and I still call home. So love seeing the growth of the country and amazing talent that is growing and nurturing and maturing there as well. So really happy to be here and help everyone maybe fall a bit in love with Poland.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel in very safe hands with you both today. So excited to kind of dive in and talk through Poland in a little bit more detail. So I guess before we start talking about some of the more minutiae, why Poland? Why is Poland catching everyone's attention for hiring right now, in your opinion?
I can probably start here. I think that, there are a couple of factors that come to play and that are worth mentioning. And I think, first of all, the talent itself. I think that, Polish universities produce a high number of engineering and computer science graduates every year, And they do have a really strong emphasis on, problem solving and the algorithmical skills, which are in demand by a large number of companies. I think that, if you look at the global ranking for software engineers, Poland is scoring really high. And to give an example, I think HackerRank's global coding skills assessment, in that assessment, Poland ranked as number 3 globally. Communication isn't a problem. Majority of people do speak and communicate in English. I think location is a great one to mention. Poland is in fairly central Europe, so that there are no problems with time zones. Like, it works perfectly with North America, with Asia, as well as broader European teams. I think, it's worth mentioning the salaries, which are still lower in Poland. But you don't have to sacrifice the skill level. And last but not least, I think, there is the tech ecosystem, which keeps growing, and companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they do have the significant operation and presence in Poland, which gives, a long-term confidence in the market. So I think these are the key ones for me, at least.
Absolutely. And Barbara, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about something that's very close to my heart, which is startup scale-up scene. And if we think about even VC deals in the last 5 years, there was a big growth there as well. I think peak was, I was snooping around so that I come prepared for this webinar, that the peak was in 2021 with nearly 800 million euro invested across Polish startups, and that was the biggest sum to date. Then I think, well, we all know what happens the following year with a decrease in investment. But Poland picked up quite fast. Half of that investment came back in 2023, and the investment is still following. Maybe not at the scale that it was at the peak, but it's still quite significant. And obviously, it's part of the broader trend in Europe that we're seeing. But why I'm bringing this up is, well, on top of the investment that it clearly proves that there's a reason, that there's a trend towards looking into Poland when it comes to also early stage startups, that shows you the hunger, the innovation, the builder mindset that is already there. And you can see it just by looking at the startup ecosystem. Even despite those rougher years that followed. And it's not just the tech scene that is blossoming, it's also biotech, energy, sustainability. So there's enough room to shop around for great talent out there. It's still maturing, the VC system, but it's one of the largest or more significant hubs of CEE. Region. And yeah, I mean, we're all hoping that, and hoping, maybe also seeing that the global conditions are improving. So hopefully also with programs like European Innovation Fund, we're going to see more and more of that investment as well. Poland's also housed to quite a few unicorns, so maybe without name dropping just yet, it is worth to snoop around that talent because it is there.
Oh, absolutely. I think, like, obviously there's a couple of things we've touched upon there, from like why, what's behind like Poland's rapid growth, and like why it's becoming like one of Europe's top tech hubs. But is there anything else, Eva, that you want to kind of build on? I know you mentioned a couple of things before, like in terms of what you think, in your opinions, be like the real key driver behind this rapid growth.
So I think that, I'm still going to stand by the talent. The technical universities produce really high quality of talent, which is in demand both locally and internationally. I think the time zone is definitely great because it works for every region. Also, I think that, probably it's worth mentioning that Poland, being part of the European Union, it does benefit from the standardized regulations, like, for example, GDPR, which makes it easier for global companies to operate there. Again, cost plays a huge part in the decisions to open up offices in Poland. And I think that, over the years, Poland is no longer just an outsourcing location. It has become a hub for technical innovation. So you will be able to find, an abundance of startups and scale-ups and big tech corporations which have their offices in Poland. I think, culturally, there is this alignment as well, which works with the international companies. So this probably would be the key ones for me.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned there like startup scale, and then I think you mentioned some enterprise organizations before. Like out of interest, like do you see do you see a particular split? Do you see is it more startups that you see sort of as setting up there? Is it larger, or do you think it's actually quite evenly split at the moment?
It's a good question. I would say that you will find everything, depending where you're looking at. So obviously, if you look at Poland, you can look at a number of hubs within a country. So I think, we do have 4 major cities where the talent is located around. So it's definitely Warsaw, then there's Krakow, there's Wrocław, and I think that we call it Tri-City, but it's predominantly Gdańsk. So for example, Krakow will have the largest amount of startups. I think that last time I was checking, there were way over 200 of them. Large corporations would be building offices around, the capital of Poland, so Warsaw, and then maybe Krakow. And then you will have scale-ups. So I think that it's fairly evenly split, but majority of the large companies would be coming to either Krakow or Warsaw.
Yeah, makes sense. Just a little spot check on your Polish geography there, but thank you very much. Appreciate you going into that with me. But okay, so moving on, and you've mentioned actually culture there, so I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit more with you both. So Barbara, I guess over to you first, really. So to really succeed when obviously hiring and managing teams, we know that understanding the local culture is really crucial. So I know you've got deep expertise in that area. Could you walk us through some of the key aspects of the Polish working culture that our audience should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take this one. I think we're going to go slightly into the theory of how different cultures work together. So I'm thinking Hofstede, I'm thinking Erin Meyer. So those are big names out there on the market when we think about cross-cultural communication, ways of working, and maybe some differences in between different countries. And bear with me, we are talking about some cultural defaults, or maybe I like to call it default settings, or maybe some things that come to certain nations that tap more naturally. And it doesn't mean that the opposite is not possible. It simply means that maybe it takes a little bit more effort. Maybe it takes a little bit more of increasing the awareness. So again, this is not a rule book. It's more of a compass navigation tool so that you know if you're heading towards the right direction. And piggybacking on that research that I think everyone can. I would actually encourage a lot of people to read up on that because it's a brilliant stuff. When I think about the communication style, I mean, the polar opposites would be a very direct and a very indirect style of communication. Very direct, you're thinking maybe Netherlands, you're thinking Germany, US, and then maybe an indirect one that requires more nuanced communication, some reading in between lines. So for instance, Japan. Poland is a little bit in the middle, but leaning towards that. Mayors call it low context, so explicit, direct, clear, and that's a little bit of what you're going to pick up. Even when you think about the communication outside of work, but also that communication in the context of business comms that we're all experiencing working. I think that another important, I'm not going to cover all of the ground here, but something that I think is worth calling out is also the culture of feedback. Feedback, usually we think about the negative feedback, right? Not the praise that we give in the context of how to provide it, is more also on a direct, but not blunt side. So it's not blunt feedback. It still has to be constructive. It still has to be professional, sensible. So you would expect that negative feedback comes a tad more directly, but within those professional norms. So again, not blunt. Leading is moderately hierarchical, or leaning towards hierarchical. So again, it's a little bit more similar to what you would have by default maybe in France. but it would be the opposite of, again, we're a little bit in the middle, the opposite of what you have in super egalitarian countries like Denmark and Sweden, and also the opposite of those very hierarchical countries, maybe like China. And remember, we're not talking about the personal leadership style. We are talking about the general cultural perceptions and some norms. So take that into account. So bottom line here is, again, rules, not maybe not rules, but patterns. We still work in a very multicultural world where a lot of organizations already have a lot of workforce from different countries, bringing a lot of their own experiences to the table. So if I was to give you a key takeaway, it would be focus on culture sensitivity training, culture awareness training. That's going to help definitely the local hires. It's going to help the international managers. It's going to help you bridge the communication gaps. Also setting up some expectations, figuring out the lay of the land, like how do you want to communicate within the company? Because that's definitely going to help, especially those new hires that maybe haven't worked in a very global organizations prior. Because you will also have that talent pool, right? Let's also be very real about it. Remember that people flex, people adapt, people also communicate differently in a different context and also in different language. I communicate differently when I speak my mother tongue than when I speak my second language that I'm using right now. But that's my bottom line up front that I want to leave you with.
No, I think it's really helpful and really interesting to kind of consider all those different contexts. And I guess if you were think officers, quite a lot of like leaders and managers who are potentially joining this call today, like are there any like practical implications or takeaways that you would advise for these cultural aspects for any of those managers that are leading predominantly Polish teams?
Yeah, I definitely get ready for honestly and the direct cultural feedback, because cultural feedback also goes both ways. So you will receive that feedback. I always make a joke about people asking like how you are, like how you've been. Like in my mother tongue, I'm going to tell you exactly how I've been. That's quite a explicit question, and it's a really funny, I think, slightly funny, but an accurate description of the literal aspect of the culture, or a direct communication where it's explicit, and you ask questions, and then you receive an answer. But yeah, definitely get ready that that feedback culture comes both ways, that directness comes both ways, and take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we're all people. We all have different communication patterns. We all have different expectations. Focus on creating your own culture within the organization. I mean, that's a no-brainer for any manager.
Absolutely. No, I think really, really helpful and useful to hear like your perspective on that. And I think particularly as like we're seeing so many more like TA teams becoming even more globally dispersed, and there's so many different cultures involved in teams, that it's really helpful to kind of take these different nuances into account. So moving on to the tech landscape in a bit more detail. Eva, like let's talk about the talent. I know you mentioned that earlier before. So looking at the tech sector first, like what do you feel the defining characteristics of Poland's current tech sector is, and what are you seeing in terms of like specializations or skills that are most in demand right now?
That's a good question. I think that the tech sector in Poland is definitely maturing and growing all the time. If you want to compare it to what it used to be years ago, and by that I mean Poland was mostly a market for outsourcing and offshoring. Right now, you will find product ownership. You will be dealing with large scale problems. The complexity is there. So this is changing massively. I think that when it comes to the skill sets, there is a large demand, obviously, for ML, AI skills, as that's the direction of a lot of companies that are heading while creating the tech products. I think cybersecurity is another field where there is a large demand for professionals. There's always going to be demand for generalist skills. So like, front-end software engineers, back-end software engineers. I think nowadays, cloud or experience working with cloud is desirable. So I think that these would be the key ones, but it's definitely, shifting and maturing and growing every day.
Hmm. No, great, absolutely. And I guess from a global perspective, how does Polish engineering and product talent compare in terms of that, the skill, the innovation, and the ability to adapt, in your opinion?
Hmm. I think for a number of years, international companies have targeted Poland as a great source of candidates to hire and relocate abroad. That still very much happens and is the case. But what has been changing is that people no longer need to leave the country to chase the opportunity because the market is maturing and there are more and more international investments in Poland. I think that, as I mentioned previously, like universities still produce greatly skilled talent. Plus, people have the experience working with the scale and the ownership, which they are able to get on the local market rather than moving abroad. Obviously, you will still find people who are keen for the international experience and the traveling. But from my personal experience, it's not as frequent as it used to be, say, 10 plus years ago.
No, I think there's actually a question that just came through actually asking about if you had any data if Polish talent is hired locally to work remotely or asked to relocate to the location of where the role is based, which I think you kind of answered there. It's becoming a little, is it fair to say from to sum up what you just said there, it's still happens but less frequently. I suppose that's more on a opinion ad hoc base. I'm not sure if you've got any data points to back that up off the top of your head.
I think it depends, to be completely honest, because I think that, Poland is still very much a hybrid / remote culture. But, if you look at all the large corporations, they will require people to be in the office. And sometimes it will have to require local relocation, which is possible. I think it's a mix. I think that, a lot of companies do understand that there is the demand and there is a value for the employees in the hybrid / remote. I don't have any numbers to show at the moment. I think Basia might potentially have more to say on that one. But no, I wouldn't have from the top of my head.
No, it makes sense. And then I know we've kind of touched a little bit on the, I guess, Polish ecosystem and the strength of it, like in some of the tech companies that have moved there. But I guess just for anyone who may have joined a little bit late, which major global tech companies have established a presence in Poland more recently?
I think there are quite a few of them actually. So I think that, if you look at Warsaw and Krakow, potentially Google has a really large presence there. There is Amazon, there is Microsoft, Intel, Goldman Sachs, Revolut. So these are the more established ones, but then there are a lot of newcomers in the market. So Veeam, the company I just recently joined, is building an R&D hub in Poland. There is Netflix, there is Asana, Monday.com, Bolt, just to name a few. So every day you will see in the news that, somebody is already setting up, or there are some conversations or talks of companies considering opening an office in Poland.
Yeah, and just from like some of the companies that you've reeled off there, it doesn't seem like there's one like sector in per se within tech, does it? It's very like broad, you've got the fintechs, you've got the big software houses. It does seem like it's becoming even more broad in a wider market day by day. So it is really interesting to hear like from your perspective when you're kind of in the market. And then Barbara, like looking beyond the tech sector, are there any other regions or cities in Poland that are really known for key talent hubs in other areas?
Yeah, and maybe I'm going to piggyback on some stuff that Eva was already sharing. I mean, first of all, it's a big country. Geographically, it's a really big country, and Eva was kind enough to walk us through some of the core hubs. It's going to be no surprise. Warsaw, Kraków, Krakow is the English pronunciation. I'm from there, so I refuse to say it any other way. Tricity, which is by the seaside, so all the way up north. Then you have the western part of the country, again, a couple of big hubs, Katowice, Wrocław, then somewhere in the middle we also have Poznań, Łódź. So yeah, there's quite a lot of bigger cities, obviously different cost of labor, different type of talent pool and talent size. Also when it comes to talent mobility and then sentiments that Eva was also referring to, whether the talent is mobile or they prefer to stay in. Usually, of course, you're going to see a lot of talent around universities. And maybe this is an interesting note that you have a lot of well-educated, well-skilled, multilingual talent there that is born and bred, but also the talent that comes from many other regions. First off, the universities are affordable and great quality of learning. So that's one remark. On the other side, I was checking the statistical governmental department. Over 150 nationalities were living in Poland. I mean, a different scale, obviously. That's data from September 2024. That is also quite telling of who do you come across when you look at the country. It's quite a big of a country as well. And piggybacking to what Eva was saying, it used to be known for being the outsourcing hub. It's still there. Like that sector didn't disappear. It's I think that this one of the top three when it comes to just the pure size and investment, business service, outsourcing, BPOs, SSC, so the entire shared service center, and a second one I would say manufacturing. Those are the two that are still like a very meaningful. Of course, outside of the tech hubs, yeah, the cities, major hubs. What else can I tell you? Banking, quite big in Wrocław and Warsaw. On top of that, what roles you can think of? Different levels of IT support, also multilingual support, finance, accounting, HR, customer service, customer support. So those type of roles that you can find.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And
still big, still there.
I know
Not going anywhere.
And there's such a breadth of like talent there for sure. And I know Eva touched on a couple of the technical skills in particular that has like really sort of increased in demand in Poland. Are there any like on the professional side, any specific skills or expertise that has kind of really surfaced as a great like I guess like a attraction point for businesses hiring there?
I think that, you will get the whole variety of skills there. I obviously specialize and have specialized in the technical hiring for majority of my career. So I think that in that space, you will get pretty much everything. As I said previously, when I started working in the Polish market, probably around 8 years ago, there wasn't much experience with scale, right? Like if you wanted to hire senior people, like you would really have to look hard to be able to find them. Nowadays, just because of the investments and the global corporations coming to Poland, that experience with scale and the complexity is there. So it's no longer as difficult to hire as it used to be. But I think in general, like, whatever skill you are looking for, you should be able to hire in Poland much easier than it used to be back in the day.
Yeah, and maybe to build on that, because we talk about all of those big investments, I touched a little bit on the VC scene, which is what we nurture and what we grow. And then there's unicorns. There are those really great companies that were built from scratch. And I will name drop just to celebrate them a little bit. Obviously, I'm not associated with any of them, but that's also where you have that talent and that product vision, entrepreneurship, and building for scale, right? Because that success came and it's quite visible. You have DocPlanner, which is from the healthcare part, InPost. They're scaling up, I believe, into UK and Spain. They're doing more of a logistic parcel delivery. I like to call it like a Uber Eats for parcel delivery. If you think about that model, you have Allegro, massive marketplace. It's a very big household name. For the gaming plans, you have CD Projekt, the home of The Witcher and Cyberpunk. So the list goes on. There's quite a few of those names. Also, up-and-comers with a very heavy backing, and that shows you that that talent is there and that it's multifunctional, like cross-functional, and definitely worth shopping around in that region.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I think like sort of shifting over to like compensation first off. I know Eva, you mentioned about it a little bit earlier. Like for companies looking to hire tech talent, how should they think about compensation? Are there any key considerations that we should have top of mind?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that, in general, salaries vary widely depending on the role, on the seniority, on the location. So in Poland, like there will be remote international companies who often offer salaries at the upper end of the market, sometimes in euros, sometimes in USD. It's becoming much more common. Obviously, the salaries in Poland in general are much lower, and it really depends on the companies. Just to give you an example for the conversion, like, what I've seen in the market, it might be 3 to 1 when you are comparing US salaries to Poland. It could be 2.5 to 1. Again, if you are looking at the US salaries and you are converting that into Poland. So you can see that it's significantly cheaper to hire there, but the good thing is that you don't have to compromise for the quality of the talent. So that's number one for me. I think that, for anybody who's interested and just maybe going a little bit more into the detail, like Poland has two common engagement models when it comes to the contract. So like, there is one employment contract, widely known as FTE contract, where, you get all those benefits and the healthcare, the paid leaves. But there's also quite common model of employment, which is called B2B contract. And it's extremely common within a tech space. It offers usually the lower tax burden. So it's much better for employees, but obviously, you don't get those fully paid benefits. It is a trade-off that sometimes people are willing to make. But because of the global investments and because of the international corporations or scale-ups coming to Poland, I think the total compensation matters the most. And a lot of candidates will be looking at, not just the base salary, but like, the remote opportunities, the flexibility, and quite often the equity, because in Poland, when you get the equity, you pay only 19% of taxes on that. So that is becoming extremely popular. But, if you're looking at the whole, like it's obviously much lower than in Western Europe or in America.
I think, and I'm really glad you touched on this, Eva, because there's a couple of questions that have come in on this particular one, which I think we're probably anticipating. And just on the point you were saying there about the benefits and like the total comp, one question we've had from one of our audience is that they've got an office based in Krakow, and candidates are obviously seeking the B2B contracts that you've just mentioned. They're generally preferred over the permanent employee contracts that are offered. So their approach at the moment is highlighting benefits, so the total compensation, as you've mentioned, benefits, holidays, career progression. Are there any tips that you might have to like help convert the mindset of candidates to be a little bit more open to the perm contracts on top of the total compensation piece?
So in the places that I've worked, obviously, the composition of the total compensation was the element that convinced the candidates, just because, there was always equity involved. And you can't really give the equity to people who are not directly employed by the company, so FTEs. So that was one of the main factors. I think the job stability is obviously, a huge selling point. And obviously, you've seen what's been happening in the markets, in the global markets over the last couple of years. Like, I think a lot of candidates are really valuing that stability and, being able to get all those benefits and touch wood, if anything happens, you get that medical leave. So that usually works. Again, it's really hard to answer that question without knowing the context. So depending on the offer that the company has for a candidate, you obviously guide those conversations with the candidates to see what is actually important for them.
So maybe looking at it from the other angle, also what that contract of employment is giving you is the stability, right? Pretty much what Eva is describing. Like, hopefully you're not going to get sick, but should you get sick or should you need an extended leave for whatever reason, you're covered. And I think it's quite important for maybe for those not operating in Poland to also make that caveat that the labor law is quite complex. It's favoring employee. It's more towards the Western European countries with well-defined framework where you really have to make that employment construct solid, very structured compensation, benefits, also termination clauses. They have to adhere to the local standards, and it can cost you quite a lot should you not follow that path if this is the first time you're entering. Now you have much more of that flexibility with we call it culturally B2B contracts or business to business contract. Essentially, you're hiring a contractor that sends you an invoice. That's the very mundane way of describing what the town is trying to do, because essentially it gives them a very appealing tax incentive. But then you also gain that flexibility with, well, the labor law is the labor law, but now we're not entering into that relationship. We're entering into a different one. So while I understand the question, I think it comes down to also what is it that you're seeking for as an organization. My foremost advice would be have a chat with a legal counsel. If you don't have them in-house, then maybe arrange an introduction so that you also understand what are the benefits and risks of both of those arrangements.
Great, thank you so much. And then I guess like moving on to like hiring challenges, like we know every market has them. What do you feel that some of the common hiring challenges are that TA teams face when hiring in the Polish market?
I can probably start here. And again, I'm talking from my personal experience, but when I was, and I'm still building, teams in Poland, probably the largest challenge will be the relocation. There is a saying that it's easier to relocate a Polish person outside of Poland rather than within Poland. It's not very common in Poland to move for opportunity, especially for people who have families. Like, it's not impossible, but it's not as common as elsewhere. And it is becoming, more and more challenging for companies with an RTO hybrid working policy, as most times it does involve relocation. So for me specifically, that was, number one challenge. I think that another one would be the talent pools are usually concentrated around the hubs within Poland. As I mentioned, we have Warsaw, Gdańsk, Wrocław, Kraków. And although it's growing, it's still kind of, less mature than elsewhere. And again, that again links to that relocation. Like, if I find a really great candidate in Kraków for a company in Warsaw, like, what do we do? How do we solve that problem? Back in the day, it was that seniority, but obviously right now with more and more companies operating at scale in Poland and having that ownership, seniority isn't as big of a challenge as it used to be. So you can really find, great talent operating at the global level, sitting in Poland, being local to Poland. So this would be my top three.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I gotta adapt to that saying. It made me smile because I immediately thought of it in our mother tongue. Very different cost of living in those cities, outside of those cities. That's something that you really have to take into account when you think about your compensation strategy as an organization. It's probably a lot more structure if you're a large organization that is scaling up. You probably have more flexibility, or maybe you're still doing your research if you're building for the first time and your intention is to keep a lean small team that's can be based somewhere in Poland, or it's remotely, or whether it's in a specific hub. But just know that you're going to get very different compensation expectations depending on the region of the country. the B2B contract immediately, my top one. This is not something that just appeared out of thin air in the last years. It's always been there. It's always been a big elephant in the room. And again, coming back to that communication style, it will be a quite direct question. It comes from a very practical standpoint because they want to do the math. They want to see how much money stays in your pocket, given your compensation structure, given all the other benefits, given the cost of living, right? Nobody cares, except for the people in this very room, nobody cares about cost of labor, right? Let's just be very open about that. So that would be my top one. The contract. The second one would be location, and I probably say that since pandemic, there's still this, especially since pandemic, hybrid versus remote.
No, makes sense. There are a couple of questions actually that are related to those B2B contracts, but I'll come to them at the end, so I haven't forgotten about them. With obviously we've talked about the fact that it's obviously becoming increasingly a competitive market with specific candidate expectations. So I guess with that in mind, how can companies really differentiate themselves? And are there any particular strategies that you'd advise in terms of standing out from others in the market?
Good question. I think probably a couple of things. Flexibility on what the companies are looking for. So that's number one. I think a huge one is the working culture. I think that's what attracts the talent and that's what keeps the talent. Interesting and challenging problems to solve, especially if you are hiring software engineers and the techie people, like they want to be challenged, they want to work on something meaningful and interesting. People in Poland usually are extremely loyal to the employer if they are being treated well. So I think that creating that culture and cultivating that culture is extremely important when you are building those teams. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one for me.
Great. Barbara, anything you'd like to add to that?
Ownership and impact. It's the trend that Eva has been describing at the beginning of our webinar. But if this is what you give them, it doesn't matter if you're 100 people company or a 3,000 people company. If that's your value added, I think you can win some hearts. And obviously there's going to be, especially the senior tenured talent that can afford to browse around the market and be very picky with those opportunities. This is what you're going to give them. Of course, you're going to get their attention. It's not always about the household name. Obviously, those are going to have it a little bit easier. The known product, the solid backing or good investment, growing ARR, obviously that contributes to people's decision, but it's an interesting product, the impact and the ownership that will definitely help you.
Absolutely. And so I guess we've talked about like the working culture and how to differentiate, and then we've talked about like the challenges that TA teams face throughout the process. But is there anything that you would advise I guess the talent team's been aware of, like what candidates are generally expecting throughout this whole engagement or process?
I think very taking into account the communication style, be ready to get asked questions very bluntly without sugarcoating. It's not going to be rude. It's just going to be very factual, what matters to them, and maybe not judge them because of that, because of the cultural context. Like it's quite natural to ask, okay, what's your work setup? What's this? What's that? And then they're going to arrive to a decision. So this very indirect, trying to bring someone over to the call to start selling, it might really decrease your interest rate or may cause you some dropouts in the process, because we find it culturally acceptable to ask those questions quite bluntly, not rudely, but upfront.
I think, very, very often you will get like, black and white, not necessarily, quite gray, there is this something between the lines, like there's got to be that clarity. And obviously, sometimes maybe, I am speaking from my like, British way of working because I spent so many years there, and like I've lost that bluntness. But when I moved to Poland, I did get that reality check, and I had to readjust again. And as Barbara said, like it's nothing in bad faith. It's just a way of communication and like knowing where you are standing. So don't be put off by that. I think a lot of people really enjoy that because they know what they get. But that's one of the things that differentiates the talent pool in Poland from other working cultures.
I think that's a really good point, and I think like obviously one of the things that's so helpful to know and be aware of when you're kind of breaking out into a new market. My final question for you both, because I'm conscious there's a couple of questions in Q&A that I want to make sure we've got time to get to. If companies are going to hire in Poland, which I imagine obviously many of the people who joined this call are either doing so right now or thinking of doing, what are the absolute top 2 to 3 things that they should be concentrating on to be successful?
I think it's good to define why they are looking to hire in Poland, right? Like, is it because they want to reduce the cost? Is it because they are aware of the talent and, they want to focus building those hubs? So the why is extremely important because then you can obviously build that messaging around that. Define who you are looking to hire because, like hiring is a big word, and like you can go into the market and like pretty much look for anything. Like define the skill set that you need and kind of come up with a strategy of how you want to get it, and know what you are offering. Like what are your key selling points? Just be really bullish about it, because one thing which I really like about being in Poland and working in Poland is that you can still feel that growth in the economy every single day. Like, there is new products being built, new companies coming in, and there is a huge appetite, for something new. So whatever you decide to do, have a really good story around it. And I can assure you that will attract the best talent.
That's great. Barbara, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's brilliantly said. And it's quite competitive. It's getting more competitive. I mean, we're seeing the market slowly resurrecting. But think about those bigger players. Think about the local unicorns. Think about the VC investment that is still increasing. There's a lot happening on that market. What makes you stand out from the crowd? Why would someone give you their attention knowing that we are that very straightforward nation? We're going to ask you what's in it for me before I'm going to give you my time. Other than that, everything what Eva said is quite on point.
I think that's great. Thank you. There's some really good actionable insights and advice there. So moving on to just some of our questions, I will, as I mentioned, there were a couple on the B2B contracts. I appreciate that there's a certain amount of information we'll be able to share, but I will start with them because there's quite a few. So what is your take on the potential amendments in B2B contract rules for technical talent? And do you anticipate an impact to the IT sector and investment attractiveness as a result?
This is a really big question, and I really would refrain from addressing it because you really have to. There's some things at stake there, and if I'm thinking about an employer, I would immediately say, have a chat with a legal counsel, with an employment lawyer, figure out what's out there. But take it also. What you got to take into account is the political scene, because you don't know how that's going to change, and how lucrative it will remain being. So my take will be it is a gray area. Giving someone advice on that, it's quite hard. It is common, so it's not an untypical thing on the market.
Maybe one thing which is worth adding, because this is a vast subject, right? Like, and obviously depending who is hiring, how the person is hiring, like, are you building a site or do you just look for contractors? And obviously, you know, different things work just for a couple of contractors that you need to hire within Poland, and different things will work for the site. So as Basia said, best, you know, depending what the circumstances are, because, you know, it's really hard to guess from the question, I would say consult the legal team. They are the best to advise, but I don't think B2B contracts are going anyway. And, you know, like there is a really large increase for the FTE employment because of the benefits that are being given. And I can safely say from the experience, and, you know, I've been working in a big tech and scale ups who were only offering the FTE contracts and were hiring at scale. People were truly interested in that. Even the ones who have spent the whole career working on B2Bs, they were really happy to switch for the FTE contracts.
Great, thank you. And I guess moving away from the B2B contracts, but more generally speaking, like questioning on probation periods. So are probation periods a typical contract agreement for companies in Warsaw and Poland, etc., for technical roles?
Oh, good question. I can say that I've seen both. I've seen companies who were hiring straight away on a FTE contract, and I've seen companies who are having the probation period. Probation period is not uncommon. I would say, you know, majority of the companies will have it in the clause. But then again, you know, I've seen the exceptions to the rule, and I've seen companies who are hiring without it. They would be in minority. So from my personal experience, majority of the places will have the probation period.
Yeah, that's still pretty standard on the market, to what Eva is saying. And very often your full-time contract starts with a one with an end date. So it's going to be a year or an 18 months before you get the second one that is indefinite. And again, coming back to the labor law being quite protective, there's only a number of months you can be on employed via you as an employee, right? Or you as an organization provide a contract with a limited duration only for several, I think it's 18 months. I don't want to make this up. I don't remember it's by heart, despite having masters in it. And then also, maybe we're talking about probation, but I'm immediately thinking about notice periods. Notice periods might be long. 1 month standard, it can go up to 3 months, and we're talking calendar months. It is customary that you get a handshake agreement and reduce it, but it's not a must. So maybe looking at it also from the other side of the bargain, if you're opening your hub there and you're thinking about hiring, take into account the notice period.
That's great. And there's a couple here on conversation, so I'm trying to group them together because I'm conscious we've got a couple of minutes left. But from your perspective, is it fair to say that Polish IT or technical salaries are roughly at around 70 to 80% compared to German ones? I know, Eva, you mentioned before about like the 2-to-1 ratio, but is there any further information you can give in comparison to Germany?
It's really hard to say, to be completely honest, because it depends on the composition of the salaries. Maybe, you know, for certain workplaces, the base salaries could be, you know, not far off from what you're making in Germany. But again, like if you do get stock, that's where you will see the difference. So really hard to kind of generalize that. The salaries will potentially be lower in Poland, but whether it's going to be 70, 80%, I can't comment because I haven't seen. I think that, you know, I've seen the base salaries sometimes being very similar to the Western salaries, but, you know, the difference would be in the equity, which will, you know, potentially lower the total package.
Really helpful, thank you. And then finally, are there any specific platforms that are more used in Poland to look for B2B jobs within technical or software engineering roles?
There are plenty of, there are a couple of job boards that are popular in Poland that are widely used. So I think one of them is Just Join IT. They should be thanking me for promoting them, but, you know, they were actually, you know, widely used. I think the other one is No Fluff Jobs. Again, you know, it's a good advertising place. There are a couple of Polish ones like Pratuj.pl. Not necessarily as widely used. So I would say that Just Join and No Fluff are most commonly used. And obviously every single company is using their own platform, the websites and the advertising. I think, nowadays the direct outreach is, as popular as ever. So depending really who you want to get and, what sort of talent you are targeting, obviously the senior talents who are settled will probably be not looking at any of those job boards. So you need to have a slightly different approach, but there is a variety depending on your need. LinkedIn always works. So pretty much everything.
No, that's really
Yeah.
helpful.
And it's not uncommon that companies make a note, usually at the top, if they're offering B2B arrangements or only contract of employment, or maybe that they're offering both. So that also became a bit of a habit. Whether you're thinking about passive or active candidates, they would probably ask that question. So that's a direct response to what the market's expecting.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious that we are almost out of time. So thank you for such fantastic discussion, like Barbara and Eva, for sharing like all of your insights and your knowledge. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot from our conversation. I'm sure that everyone who's joined us has today. So before we say goodbye, a quick reminder about the Hire community. So as I mentioned at the start, if you're not already a member, it is completely free to join. And we're here to keep these conversations going beyond today. As I mentioned, this is one of our first webinars of the series. So definitely pop on over to hirehq.com and become part of our growing network. As mentioned, we have been recording the session and we'll also be circulating that. So if there's anything that you want to refer back to, you will be able to. And a massive thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us this afternoon or this morning. Again, to yourselves, Barbara and Eva, for your insights, and also to our sponsor Talentful for making today's webinar possible. Hope that you found this session valuable, and we look forward to seeing you at future Hire events and webinars.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to have this chat today.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.